Something that a lot of content creators forget is that there's a huge difference between educating and flexing. And if you're actually trying to teach somebody a new skill, then just do that and shut up about your journey. Every OSL video is the same, talking about the same thing in the same way by somebody that's been painting for like 20 years. And because of that, they end up with an awesome model and we still end up f***ing confused. Wondering how all of those little steps that looks like nothing's changing at all somehow ends up as an absolute masterpiece. This isn't going to be pretty, but it might actually explain what's going on with OSL. This little fella is Jeff and he's our light source. He's actually going to be squeezing out light. But as the light moves further away from Jeff, it's going to get weaker. And in this video, we're going to use different colors to represent the changing intensities as the light diffuses. And if we soften all of those hard edges, you can see how the different layers work together to start representing and selling the idea of something glowing. But before we get to the fancy stuff, we need something for it to sit on. And this time around, we're using the Artillery Witch from Trench Crusade. But because the OSL is the main deal here, we just need something basic. All we're going to do is build up some easy volumes and pick out some details with the dry brush. From Deep Ocean Blue, I'm just going to add a little bit of ice yellow in as we start to build up those layers. And since we're building up a pretty easy gradient, you don't need to rinse the brush in between every layer. Every time you add a little bit more ice yellow, it's going to mix itself with the pigment that you still have left in the bristles from the last layer and blend out a little bit more naturally. And you don't have to highlight equally. As you get lighter and brighter, just push the pigment towards where you want the focus. And when it's done, we're just going to pull out Turnbull Turquoise speed paint and slap it everywhere. Now that we're done here, we need to bring Jeff back. Just like before, Jeff is where all of our light's going to come from. And don't worry, we're painting two, airbrush and traditional brush. First up, we're going to need Diabolic Plum because we're going to work backwards in layers. No matter what tool you're using, layering usually works in the same way where you build from dark to light. When using an airbrush to create an OSL effect, you want to start shooting from the direction of the light source. Remember, Jeff is the one that's squeezing out all the light, so it makes sense that everything has to originate from him. You can see with the Wicked Pink that the bomb is getting an underglow, and that's simply because the light is under the bomb. Whereas the witch herself is getting more of a zenithal because the light is above her, so it's shining from top to bottom. And just like the diagram, everything that is closer to Jeff is going to be brighter. This step's a little bit more for me because I like extra saturation. You don't have to do it, but it does look a lot cooler. Except now Jeff's gone. But because this is a family and he is such a valued member, we're going to offer him a pizza party to come back. Works every time. Now that Jeff's back at his desk, we can start really building up this intensity. Remember in the diagram, we were using different colors to represent the different intensities. And now that we're getting a lot closer to the actual light source, we're going to represent that intensity with burning ore. It's the same idea, the same angles, just a lot closer and a lot tighter. Aiming for the areas that would only be affected in a much shorter range. Now this next step with the ice yellow isn't actually part of the OSL effect. All it's doing is laying down a brighter base so that when we come in with our moonbeam yellow, it's going to appear a lot more saturated. Yellow can still be a little bit tricky. We don't need it fighting with other colors just to push its intensity. Now a lot of people think that airbrushing is cheating, but there are some disadvantages. And usually it's overspray. Let's clean that up. While we've still got the airbrush, I'm going to go back to Power Node Glow and start pulling back and blending in all those lighter colors. Then I'm going to grab a brush and pull out the Turnbull Turquoise, thin down to 1 drop speed paint to about 4 parts medium. We want this as thin as possible so we're only tinting. This way we can draw the shadows back in without creating a hard line or coffee staining around that blend. We still want the light to fade away, not a hard stop. Except in the areas that the light wouldn't be touching, like the underpit, or Queen Victoria's neck ruffle thing. After this, we're going to go back in with pure Turnbull Turquoise and start defining and separating some of the heavier details. It's little steps like these that actually pull everything together and make it work. Regular viewers of the channel know that I don't do ad spots unless it is explicitly related to the hobby. And the reason I can do that is because of the best Patreon members in the world and now being a part of the Army Painter Factory team. So if you want to pick up any of the paints or brushes that you've seen in this video, jump over to the Army Painters web store and use the code HERESY5 at the checkout for a sweet discount. And we also have a merch store where you can pick up synthwave inspired hoodies, shirts, patches, badges, and even shoes. Links to the Army Painter, the Patreon, and the merch store are all in the description. Welcome back, Jeff. Let's do this all again, but with a paintbrush. This is the one that's not going to be so pretty. And now that we can't rely on the blending that the airbrush gives us naturally, we're gonna have to use a few extra colors. Terrestrial Titan's gonna be our first port of call, and we want this one to take up the same amount of space that the Diabolic Plum did in the first part of the video. So we're gonna treat this step as somewhat of a base coat. And I'm gonna be using a few different techniques, because obviously brush and airbrush are very different. But we still want a similar effect, and it's the same idea. When we were using the airbrush, we were spraying from the direction of the light. And taking that same thought process, we can apply that to traditional brushwork by only using strokes that lead away from the light. So for this, I'm typically just going to be using downstrokes, which means that the brush is only making contact with the model and depositing paint while I'm pulling down. However, this is not a hard and fast set in stone rule because some areas may need just that little bit of extra attention. While it's great to have all of these ideas and techniques, it's more important to paint for the outcome, and sometimes that means deviating from that technique. You may have also noticed that we've gone into Diabolic Plum, and everything we're doing here is just basic layering techniques. One color is going to sit on top of the next, covering just a little bit less space than the previous. And right now, even moving into Wicked Pink, I'm still not concerned with blending. For two reasons. One, because we're going to use the Power Node Glow effect paints again to draw everything back, and that will help blend out some layers. And two, I'm intentionally leaving hard lined layers. Not because that's what's best for the model, but that's the best way to show you what's actually going on here. And that's the difference between education and flexing. It doesn't matter what level of painter I am. The important part is showing fundamental ideas that people can understand and recreate. I understand that creators want to present their best work and be admired, but it doesn't matter that you can dunk when you're trying to show someone how to free throw. And now we're coming back into that Power Node Glow. With the airbrush, this was just to increase the saturation and intensity of the pink, but when it comes to the brushwork, this actually does a little bit more for us. Because it's a filtering layer, not only is it going to hypersaturate everything, it's also going to help out blur out those layer lines and soften the transition. But a word of warning, it is pretty strong, so you will have to thin it down a little bit. And now, just like before, we are moving into burning ore as we get closer to Jeff, our light source. Again, representing the intensity by proximity. And here's where we can really start to showcase the difference between an airbrush and a traditional brush. They each have their pros and cons and their uses. An airbrush will give you a nice easy gradient and is fantastic for blending. But as we found out with the overspray, there isn't a lot of precision. Whereas a traditional brush does have the precision and will help you with finer select detail, but will make you work harder for that same blend or transition. But now that we are using a traditional brush, it means we can pick out some of the details that would be affected by that more intense light, even though that it is a little bit further away, which creates more visual interest. It also means that when we're highlighting, we can do it with a much sharper and more intentional focus. Things like picking out some of the details on the scroll work instead of just having the entire head be yellow. But the biggest difference between the airbrush and the traditional brush, it comes down to personal preference and what tools you have available. Because at the end of the day, they are both just tools. On the surface, OSL is a pretty simple idea. Paint the bright thing and make it look like it's glowing. The issue that a lot of us run into is that we're getting explanations from absolute masters of the craft. Artists that are thinking about not only direction and light placement, but how light interacts with different materials and how different colors then interact on the landing spot of the object itself. And these are all incredibly important things to take into consideration when you're painting at such a high level. But this can quite quickly become information overload for somebody that's never tried it before or just isn't grasping the idea. The real question here is, which one of these do you prefer? And the bigger question is, which one are you more likely to do? As always, a massive thank you to InGames, the Army Painter, and the best Patreon members in the world. The only reason that this channel or any other channel even exists is because you guys keep coming back and supporting it. Big love, you filthy animals.